continues the theme of Lumpur Cha, and what better way to begin and end a retreat, I guess. Yeah, it's just amazing to think of how wisdom just resounds through the generations of practitioners, of people who take interest in these things, and how fresh, to this day, how fresh Ajahn Chah's reflections are, and so to return to them again and again, just like a spring of clear water. It's helpful, I think, too. Some of you, I'm sure, have spent time in the suttas, and some of you have probably read them all and are actually very familiar with them. And some, perhaps, of you have not quite gained an acquaintance. You haven't quite, you don't quite have the email address that sort of always gets you in the door, and they might feel they have that sense of foreignness. They come from a different culture and a different time, perhaps, some of the terminology and so forth. But here we have Ajahn Chah being translated by, Westerners of our generations. And so, and of course, with, for instance, Ajahn Jayasaro's text that I was reading from last night, we have interpreters that can at least explain in real terms what Thai culture looked like, Thai Isan culture looked like 3 or 4 generations ago, and up into the 1990s or what have you. So we have good interpreters that can open the door for us. And then, of course, we have teachers. Lumpur Sumedho. I'm living with Lumpur Viradhammo here, who spent time with Lumpur Cha, and of course, he spent decades studying with, practicing with Lumpur Sumedho, who lived with Lumpur Cha for many years. So we have still in this generation people who have been around this man, and so it's inspiring in many, many ways. And I think different of us, various practitioners, respond to different elements, different dimensions of this story. So anyway, this is something I transcribed from years ago at Abhayagiri. There was a kind of commemoration of Lumpur Cha's teaching, and Lumpur Sumedho was there. Thanajan Pasanno, of course, was abbot there at the time, and so a great number of monks who knew Lumpur Cha personally came and offered reflections and teachings and so forth. And this is I transcribed this from a tape years ago, from this one. Maybe about 18 years ago, something like that. And I've always loved this. It's a letter that Lumpur Cha dictated. I think they had an old reel-to-reel tape or something at the Wapapong, and so he dictated it to a monk, or he sent it as a tape. I'm not sure of. In any case, it's translated here by one of those present at the gathering at Abhayagiri. And it was recorded. So there's a kind of tender story behind this. There's an English woman practitioner, Marjorie, who spent some time at Wapapong. And I presume this would have been, I'm going to say, it wouldn't have been any later than 1991 or 1981, perhaps. So I'm going to say it's sometime in the 70s. So this is fairly early days, a long time ago. So she spent I don't recall now whether it was a rains retreat, but she spent a goodly amount of time. And that kind of travel and practice was not nearly so common in those days as it is now, with tour groups going over to see all the Kru Bhajans in Thailand, and then, just because they're in Asia, they go over to India and go to all the 4 holy sites too before flying back to America or England or wherever they're from. So that kind of travel just wasn't so common in those days. So This is a person of note, Marjorie. So Lumpur Cha writes or has this letter sent off to her. It's quite interesting, and it touches on one or two themes that came out for me of the reading that I gave last night. Someone who is intelligent will have this kind of attitude towards the various moods that arise in the mind. When goodness arises, let it be good. We know also, we understand its nature. And to let be the not good. We let it be according to its nature. We don't take hold of it because we don't want anything. We don't want evil, neither do we want good. We want neither heaviness nor lightness, happiness nor suffering. In this way, our wanting is at an end. Peace is firmly established. When we have this kind of peace established in our mind, we can depend on it. This peace, we say, has arisen out of confusion. Confusion has ended. The Buddha called the attainment of final enlightenment an extinguishing in the same way that fire is extinguished. We extinguish fire at the place where it appears. Whether it's hot, wherever it's hot, that's where we can make it cool. And so it is with enlightenment. Nibbana is found in samsara. Enlightenment and delusion exist in the same place, just as do hot and cold. It's hot where it was cold, and cold where it was hot. When heat arises, the coolness disappears, and when there's coolness, there's no more heat. In this way, Nibbana and samsara are the same. We are told to put an end to samsara, which means to stop the ever-turning cycle of confusion. This putting an end to confusion is extinguishing the fire. When external fire is extinguished, there is coolness. Internally, when we have craving or aversion or delusion, we experience heat and discomfort, don't we? When the internal fires of sensual craving, aversion, and delusion are put out, then there is coolness also. This is the nature of enlightenment. It's the extinguishing of the fire, the cooling of that which was hot. This is the end of samsara, the cycle of birth and death. When you arrive at enlightenment, this is how it is. It's an ending of the ever-turning and ever-changing, an ending of greed, aversion, and delusion in our minds. We talk about it in terms of happiness because this is how worldly people understand the ideal to be. But in reality, it has gone beyond. It is beyond both happiness and suffering. It is perfect peace. So, Marjorie, as you return to London, you should take this teaching which I have given you and contemplate it carefully so that you can establish yourself in mindfulness and clarity. I have had little opportunity to give you instruction, but in this time you have been able to study the real meaning of our practice. Your stay here hasn't been easy, and I thought of you with compassion many times. You arrived in Thailand and came directly to Wat Pah Pong. Things are very different here, surrounded by forests and in a strange place. It's like being a lost child. Sometimes you've come to see me and I've seen the tears start to flow down your cheeks. When I've seen the tears, it has really gladdened me. Why was I glad? Because I know that you are being pushed to study and realize truth. For us humans, if the tears don't come, we don't really accept truth. In Thailand, the tears keep coming. Back in England, the tears still flow. Now I expect the tears have dried up and you're at ease. If we don't get them out, they keep coming wherever we are. It's the water of suffering. But if we're done with our suffering, we can be done with our tears and experience real happiness. So I will close here, and in April, if I have sufficient merit, I'll be flying to London and seeing you there. In the meantime, when you return, please visit Ajahn Sumedho and the monks there and send my best wishes for their happiness. I hope, Marjorie, that you will take this teaching and practice with it for the end of suffering. Come to an end of suffering before the end of this life. That way you can be peaceful and at ease. May this practice lead you to happiness. May it help you in truth. May it help you grow in truth. May it help you be freed from the suffering of birth and death. Yeah, I find even reading that, I haven't read it now for a couple of years, I guess. I find it kind of, there's emotion that comes up in the reading of it. Very beautiful. Very, on so many levels. I mean, we have a sense of how busy Ajahn Chah was, all the responsibilities he had, and yet he, turns and gives 5 minutes to making sure that this letter or tape or whatever gets delivered to England. And the teachings it contains are they're just lapidary in their quality, their purity, and so succinct and true. And one of the reasons I think I thought of this last night was this direct relation between with regards to what we do with suffering, what we do with fear. And of course, last night, not all of you probably were on the Zoom last night, but he was speaking. He was in that particular reading. He was undergoing this tremendous challenge of sitting in a charnel ground overnight for several nights, facing his deepest fear, as Ajahn Jayasaro, his room 101 in the Orwellian sense of that phrase. And probably most of us seldom, if ever, face fear of that kind of caliber, but still it can happen. It can happen in our lives here. We have all kinds of calamities, serious accidents and injuries, and of course, even in the midst of quiet Canadian cities, there's violence and things of this nature. So fear does have a place, and the place to practice dealing with that kind of fear, that kind of concern, dread, is not when it happens, because that's like trying to lift a heavy weight when you've never even been in a gym and just gotten in shape. That's not the time. It's not the time. The time to practice with this kind of thing is right here and now, doing exactly what it is you're doing right here and now, attending in this instance to words of the Dhamma, but attending more broadly to the arising of experience from one moment to the next, and gaining the flexibility and the strength and the habits of attention to be fully present to what is. And we all know what is happening in the present. It isn't always pleasant. It isn't always what we want. We want things to be otherwise. Hence we suffer. Craving is the second noble truth. It's pretty, it's axiomatic, isn't it? But as Lumpur Cha says and reminds us of, if you're trying to extinguish a fire, you don't go to the part of the building where it's a little cooler and start to, spray your fire extinguisher or take your hose. I mean, that would be pointless, wouldn't it? But it's more comfortable over here. I could get hot there. It looks a little bit too hot, really uncomfortable. No, if there's fire in the building, you want to save the building, you've got to go to where the fire is. And that's what's happening in the moment. Our fears take us to the other side, to another room, to outside, away from the fire, the flames. But if we're honest and have some courage, and if this honesty and this courage have actually developed over time in the gymnasium our practice right here in our living rooms or wherever we are, then we have some qualities of attention, of mindfulness. We have some strength, some resolve, some bearing. There's some gravitas to this work that we bring to our daily lives. And then when something comes up of a very difficult nature, a fearsome nature, painful nature, we have something to bring to it. Many stories in the, among monks that I've seen, from monks who have maybe spent years on Tudong in Thailand, or, who have have undergone a very strenuous form of practice. And one of the things that often is impressed upon me by these stories, by the more dramatic ones, monks are always interested in the dramatic ones. You don't always get the dramatic ones, but encounter with animals and that kind of thing. But one of the things that always is impressed upon me is, the work we do, the practice that we undergo in doing things like we're doing today, is deliberate, is conscious. Okay, what do I do now? And it's a practice. We've trained in certain things, and if we get confused about what to do next, we have a teacher and we ask them, and that gets cleared up a little bit, and on we go. And we're reminding ourselves as we're sitting here, oh, there's thinking again. There I am, worried about something, and now all I need to do, this is the instruction, I bring my attention back to the mindfulness right now. Okay, so off I go again. So we're giving ourselves instruction, and we're continuing practice, and we're practicing, aren't we? What we don't realize is happening through all this practice, and of course, the better the practice, the better it is. If all we're doing is practicing, just being lost in whatever is occurring in our emotional worlds or our mental worlds, then that's what we're gaining our habits in, obviously. But insofar as this practice is making use of the instructions that our teachers give us, and returning to the moment, and looking squarely at it, and letting it go, and noticing how things change, because that's their nature, and things of this kind. If we're doing this, and we're developing habits around this kind of habit, and these habits are becoming natural, and this is what we're carrying into the world, and so we find over time that we're taking these good habits, this natural way of being, you might say, and we're taking it out into the world, and we're a little kinder, a little more restrained in our actions in public. Generosity comes a little more easily to us. We find compassion, the heartstrings moved by compassion a little more easily. All of these beautiful results of practice, in a sense, come of their own, but because we're making good practice a natural characteristic of our behavior and attitude. And then I think what we can take, returning to me listening to, say, some Kruba Ajahn speak about his years in the jungle or something like that, something will happen, a tiger, to use the archetypical example, a tiger or a big cobra or something like that. Something happens in the environment that is really arresting, and then you get to see. Then they would see, this is what happened. All of a sudden, just using an example, all of a sudden, all I could think of was Buddho, Buddho, Buddho. I saw the fear, and then it was replaced by Buddho, Buddho. Or in the case of Lumpur Cha, you might recall from last night, those of you who heard that, how he just looked in the face, wide-eyed, even though his eyes were closed, but at the fear, at this terrific fear, his just overwhelming fear. And it grew and it grew and it grew. And then because it was its nature, it just stopped. It was just replaced by stillness, by peace. It wasn't his willing and doing. He couldn't think of anything to do, but because he'd sat with it so long, because he had dared to put himself in a place where he knew there was nothing else he could experience but fear, because that's the worst thing that he could have done. Eventually it came to an end. He went right through it. So he put the fire out right where the fire was taking place, right where the embers were continuing to glow. Spark other things. That's where he put the fire out. And also in that story, and in life more broadly, he's not putting. I mean, he didn't determine to put the fire out. Okay, now it's time for me. No, he didn't determine to put an end to the fear. No. What I'm saying is that the practice that he gave himself to for years by that time, but also in extremis during those nights in the charnel ground, that was what was loading up. This was developing the conditions, the strength, the barmi, to enable him to confront his greatest fear. And then those qualities of mind, those factors of enlightenment, you might say, they took over. So it's above and beyond our willing and doing. And that's something that I've always taken great solace in, the sense that if we, as one of my teachers used to say, your duty is to watch the breath, or be present in the moment. That's your duty. But it's the duty of other things. It's the duty of wisdom. It's the duty of courage, or what have you, other qualities of mind which are impersonal. It's their duty. They'll come to your aid when they need to. When you really need them, that's when they'll come. That's their duty. And the only reason that they come, the only way that they come, is by you doing your duty. And that's the simple act of being present to what's occurring, and not flinching, not being unwilling to look at things that are difficult, painful, fearsome. And in doing so, we can develop the resources to put out the fire. That's what Lumpur Cha is telling us here. And coming from him, of course, those of us with some faith in the quality of his wisdom, coming from him, we understand that it carries with it authority, carries with it spiritual power, gravity, and so is worthy of attending to, respecting. So it's very important, I think. It's very, very valuable and encouraging to have good reason to have faith in the practice that we undertake. Not because we're in control of everything. We just, our duty, as I've said, our duties in this practice are really quite simple. They're quite straightforward. They're rather modest, actually. But when we do, there are things occurring. There are spiritual powers which are developing in and around us without our knowing, and they can come to our aid when we need. That's their duty. That's their nature.